As expected, according to Model 3 in Table 3, SES residential segregation was positively and strongly linked to SES school segregation. Nevertheless, Model 3 also shows that the level of private school enrollment in all three types of private schools was positively related to SES school segregation too, after controlling for residential segregation. The relevance of the educational market-related variables for explaining SES school segregation is clear upon comparing the estimated standardized coefficients. The estimated effects of the proportion of both non-subsidized private schools enrollment and fee-paying voucher schools enrollment were greater than the estimated effect of residential segregation. Additionally, Model 4 included the four complementary measures of the kind of school supply existing in the municipality, number of schools of each type. This reduced the estimated coefficients of the enrollment of both types of voucher private schools. In fact, both coefficients became statistically not significant. However, the estimated coefficient of the variable that measures the number of private schools with shared financing became significant. This finding suggests that at least part of the estimated effects of voucher private schools, especially those with the co-payment system, on SES school segregation is linked to the quantity of schools operating in a given area, an indirect measure of the intensity of school choice available for parents. Lastly, it should be highlighted that all fitted models reported in Table 3 accounted for a remarkable large proportion of the observed variability in SES school segregation among municipalities. Overall, our estimates indicate that the educational policy variables are strong predictors of SES segregation at local level. For example, the estimated coefficients of Model 3 imply that an increase of one standard deviation in the participation rate of the enrollment in voucher private schools with co-payment at municipal level was related to an increase in the SES school segregation of 0.37 standard deviations on the D-index. This is 2.5 times the estimated effect of an equivalent increase in free private subsidized schools, and 1.2 times the estimated effect on school segregation of an equal increase in residential segregation. These estimated effects are larger when we include the number of school types as additional control variables, Model 4, which means that segregation in big cities is larger because individual schools are much more differentiated in price, serving targeted groups of families defined by their payment capacity. Summarizing, based on the regression models of Table 3, we concluded that the variables linked to the market dynamics present in the Chilean education at local level accounted for a relevant portion of the observed differences in SES school segregation among municipalities, and that this relationship was not entirely explained by the degree of SES residential segregation. Discussion and perspectives. The complexities of school segregation. The socioeconomic segregation of schools is a relevant characteristic of an educational system, since it potentially affects both the quality of the educational process and the equity of the distribution of educational opportunities and outcomes. Undoubtedly, SES school segregation is a complex result of causes that combine structural and cultural features of a society with characteristics of the organization and operation of the educational system itself. In this paper, we presented an empirical analysis of the SES school segregation in Chile, whose educational system is regarded as an extreme case of a market-oriented education. Specifically, we estimated the magnitude and evolution of the SES segregation of Chilean schools at both national and local levels, and we studied the relationship between some local educational market dynamics and the observed magnitude of SES school segregation at municipal level. Summarizing, we found that the magnitude of the socioeconomic school segregation in Chile was very high and tended to slightly increase during the last decade. We also found that private schools, including voucher schools, were more segregated than public schools, and we estimated that some educational market dynamics, example privatization, school choice, and fee paying, accounted for a relevant proportion of the Chilean SES school segregation. We interpret these findings as broadly consistent with our hypothesis that links SES school segregation and market-oriented mechanisms in education, which is additionally supported by recent international reports based on PISA 2009, OECD 2010, and handbook chapters specialized on these issues, which demonstrated that larger private schools' participation on educational market is not coupled with improvement on the average national standardized test scores, but it is strongly related to more segregated and unequal educational systems. Our study faced some data limitations that prevent us from making more strong causal claims. For example, we did not have reliable data for estimating the segregation index prior to the implementation of the market-oriented reform in 1980, or even prior to the introduction of the co-payment system in 1989 and its reforms in 1993. Thus, it was not possible to conduct pre-post analysis. Additionally, although we controlled for several relevant covariates, including urban segregation, cross-section multiple regression analysis did not allow us to make causal inferences. Therefore, additional research is needed to fully understand the relationship between SES school segregation and some of the market-oriented educational policies that are currently being discussed in many countries. Nevertheless, we do think that our findings provide enough evidence to be cautious about the potential effect of those policies on increasing SES segregation. Certainly, a comprehensive evaluation of market reforms in education should consider not only equity but also quality issues. For example, Hanushek and Wozman provided international evidence that market competition could improve educational outcomes when schooling systems contain strong accountability mechanisms in high levels of autonomy for their schools. Nevertheless, as we discussed previously, the current international evidence is not conclusive on this dimension. An unexpected finding of our study was that the level of estimated SES segregation was somewhat higher in primary schools than in secondary schools. A plausible explanation is that higher possibilities of commuting for secondary schools students contribute to a greater social integration. Another hypothesis is that in areas with limited high school supply, the larger relative size of secondary schools allows the students who were more segregated in primary schools to be gathered. A third potential explanation is that in a context where secondary schools are more selective than primary schools, which have almost universal coverage, the social distance between the 30% lowest SES group and the rest of the students is smaller. And as such, they have higher chances of being more socially integrated. This latter hypothesis is also consistent with the fact that secondary schools' SES segregation has increased in the same period in which the dropout rate of the most disadvantaged students has decreased rapidly. We did not study the effects of SES segregation, school segregation, but the fact that Chilean students are so highly segregated may be related to the findings that consistently indicates that in comparative terms, students' academic achievement is strongly related to students' SES in Chile, an issue that future studies should tackle. An enduring debate within the sociological literature has evolved around the level of autonomy that educational systems have from other fields of their societies. From this perspective, the Chilean case shows that educational institutions are not just a mirror of contextual factors, since educational dynamics should have made SES school segregation considerably greater than residential segregation. Consequently, desegregation educational policies are needed in Chilean society once more socially desegregation educational policies are needed if Chilean society wants more socially integrated schools. However, policymakers tend to avoid desegregation policies as they are highly contentious. In this respect, some policy implications that can be drawn from the current study clearly show the potentially controversial aspects of desegregation policies. For example, in order to reduce price discrimination in education, the co-payment mechanism should be eliminated, making voucher schools free, a policy that would be consistent with comparative evidence showing that countries with larger percentage of private finances for schools obtain lower average standardized test scores and more unequal educational outcomes across schools. Additionally, to reduce self-selection, parent schools' choice should be controlled to some level, a policy that has been in place in many school districts for several years. Besides, to ameliorate schools' exclusion practices, admission policies at school levels should be regulated and supervised, as a recent Chilean law does for the early primary grades. Finally, to make possible that Chilean public educational compete with private subsidized schools in more egalitarian conditions, it is imperative that public schools receive a priority treatment in several dimensions like funding, regulations, and school improvement programs, and standard practice in most countries. All of these educational policy issues relate to very fundamental aspects of the organization of an educational system, its relation with influential stakeholders, and it's linked to social class dispute in the educational field.